What if there were two Australias? Back in 1933, the history of Australia could have gone very differently. Amid the depths of the Great Depression, over 66% of voters backed secession in a statewide referendum in the state of West Australia. Their aim was to leave the Australian Federation, draft their own nation, and potentially re-enter the British Empire, but as an independent dominion. Parliament passed the Secession Act in 1934, and a delegation went all the way to London. Yet the British Parliament, citing constitutional conventions, ultimately refused to act. The momentum faded away, and that chapter of almost secession ended in disappointment for the locals. But what if it had happened? Today, Western Australia remains Australia's largest state by area. It's also the one with the most unoriginal name, encompassing roughly 2.5 million square kilometers across the western third of the continent. West Australia is the second largest first-level country subdivision in the world. It's exceeded only by Russia's Sakha Republic, and it's one of the most geographically isolated regions on Earth. The capital city of it, Perth, is about 2,100 kilometers from Adelaide, the nearest metropolis to the east. So you can understand why it's pretty isolated. Despite this remoteness, West Australia spans a breathtaking type of terrain. Along the southwest lies Mediterranean type land, forests, farmland, vineyards in Margaret River, and a Mediterranean type climate too. You move a little north and the landscape transitions to a semi-arid type. It's their wheat belt, then into vast deserts like the Great Victoria, Gibson, and Great Sandy deserts. In contrast, the far north features tropical climates in the Kimberley region, and these are also marked by more rugged coastlines and even monsoon influences. Nature is pretty harsh in many areas. Daytime highs can reach 49 degrees Celsius in the summer, and deadly wildlife colors the environment. But despite its vastness, West Australia's population is heavily skewed. Of nearly 3 million residents, over 90% live in the southwest corner, with around 80% concentrated in Greater Perth. Regional centers such as Geraldton, Bunbury, Albany, and Kalgoorlie each hold a few tens of thousands, but beyond their fringes, the land becomes wide open and rarely populated. Perth itself is sometimes described as the world's most isolated capital city, and that isolation is tied to West Australia's economic character. The state is rich in natural resources like iron ore, natural gas, gold, nickel, aluminum, lithium, rare earth minerals, cobalt, and much more. In 2022, its mineral and petroleum industries alone were worth approximately 183 billion Australian dollars, which accounts for 94% of West Australia and nearly 46% of Australia's merchantable export earnings. West Australia alone produces about 34% of global iron output, and they control roughly 30% of known reserves. You add gold, nickel, lithium, aluminum, petroleum, and all the other things, and they emerge as an extraction powerhouse. They also supply nearly 17% of the national GDP, with 455 billion Australian dollars. And GDP per capita ranks as the highest in Australia, over 135,000 Australian dollars per person, compared to a national average of around 74,000. I think this was one of the key things back then too. Locals felt like they contributed a lot to Australia's central government and finances without getting much support back. Of course, this was at the time. I have no idea if that support exists today. Outside those natural resources, other sectors like finance, property, insurance, and tourism have gained momentum. In 2019, tourism contributed around $9 billion, while wheat production, for instance, generated only $3 billion, and half to Australia's national output. You know, a couple months ago, we had a full-on blackout here in Portugal. You may have seen it on the news. It affected all of Portugal, Spain, even a bit of France. The whole two countries were out of power for a full day. Since then, I've been putting together sort of a survival kit in case it happens again, but then lasts for a long time. I'm talking like a full doomsday scenario. And the most important item that I have added to that survival kit is this one. This is the book, How to Rebuild Civilization. It's the ultimate survival guide for curious minds, especially if you're into history or science. From explaining forging to how to make a mirror. It's so fun to read and learn about how things work, and especially how you could make them work if you needed to. I mean, imagine all of civilization collapses, and you need to learn how to harvest cotton, wool, or linen and make your own clothes. Well, the book teaches you precisely how to do that, among hundreds of other things. And not only is the content of the book great, but the book itself is pretty great too. I mean, look how big it is, first of all, but also the great binding, the cover, the incredible quality of every single illustration. If you would like to get it too, or maybe gift it to someone, I think it's the perfect gift. You can find it through the link in my description. Quick side note, mine actually got lost in the mail, and I have to say that their customer service was the most helpful that I have ever encountered. They fixed the situation so quickly, so you can be sure that there's really no risk when you order it. It's fantastic. But anyway, let's get back to the video. Culturally and symbolically, West Australia asserts its identity through the black swan emblem. It's prominently featured on the state flag, joined by Britain's Union Jack and the Southern Cross stars. The flag emphasizes West Australia's colonial origins and distinctiveness because West Australia's origins as a British colony date back to 1829, when the adequately named Swan River Colony was formally established by a man called Captain James Stirling, and initially it was a completely separate colony from the rest of Australia. And like the earlier penal settlements in New South Wales and Van Diemen's Land, West Australia was originally intended to be a free colony, attracting settlers with the promise of land and opportunity. However, harsh environmental conditions, isolation, and a lack of labor soon forced the colony to also accept convicts from 1850 to 1868 to, support a struggling economy. Throughout the 19th century, West Australia maintained its own colonial government, laws, and customs, and had limited interaction with the East, which developed along different social and economic lines. It wasn't until the Federation of Australia in 1901 that they joined the new Commonwealth, and even then, it was the last of the 6 original colonies to agree doing so, with considerable hesitation and internal opposition. The long-standing separation contributed to a distinct regional identity that still influences political and cultural attitudes in the state today, including those recurring discussions about autonomy and even independence. Given the robust economy and identity, it's no surprise that secessionist ideas at one point existed, feeling that West Australia was sending wealth to the central government but receiving less in federal returns. Political leaders like former Premier Richard Court in 2008 pointed out some imbalances, like the fact that West Australia supplied some 35% of Australia's export income, yet received under 6% of GST redistributions. In 2011, another minister, Norman Moore, even floated secession and independent defense, perhaps backed by China. Opinion polls during COVID-19, when they sealed their borders, found around 28% of people supported outright secession. That's by no means a majority, but I think when a third of the people want independence, you have to address some of the issues causing that. The smaller, modern secession sentiment echoes the historical movements from long before 1933. Because, like we mentioned before, in the early 20th century, they made a serious and well-organized attempt to leave the Australian Federation. The push for independence reached its peak during the Great Depression, when economic hardship, high unemployment, and frustration with mostly federal trade and tariff policies led many in the region to believe they were being unfairly treated by the Commonwealth. In response, the Dominion League of Western Australia launched a campaign for secession, arguing that the state would be better off as an independent dominion within the British Empire. In 1933, a statewide referendum was held, and an overwhelming 66% of voters supported leaving the Federation. However, despite the clear mandate, the attempt ultimately failed. Like we mentioned, a delegation was sent to London to petition the British government to enact West Australia's separation, but the British, following the principles of the newly established Statute of Westminster, were unwilling to interfere. It ruled that the Australian Constitution couldn't be amended without express approval from the entire Federation, and that decision kind of deflated the movement. By 1938, the dream of secession lay in tatters. Still, the chapter showed that secession in Australia was more than idle talk, it was dangerously close to reality. And the core grievances haven't changed: economic centralism, population imbalance, the GST formula, federal bureaucracy, and regulation. Legally, seceding now would be extraordinarily difficult. The Australian Constitution has no internal mechanism for this. Section 128 allows for constitutional alteration only via referendum, with majority support in a majority of states and a majority of voters nationally. So they would have to first pass their own secession referendum, then call a national referendum to amend the Constitution and secure approval from at least 4 of the 6 states, plus national majority support. It's near impossible. Eastern states wouldn't want this. If they did, they would want compensation, and even West Australia's own people might split when faced with the costs of this independence. But if they manage this political impossibility, they might actually do pretty well. Economically, they arguably stand on their own. Its exports generate substantial revenue, it has a trade surplus, contributes to around 17% of Australia's GDP, and GDP per capita is among the world's highest. Its external trade is heavy with Asia. China, 30%, Japan, 11%, South Korea, 6%. A sovereign West Australia would have legitimate economic credibility. Still, coexistence with Australia now currently brings federal investment in health, education, welfare, infrastructure, pensions, defense, immigration. West Australia on its own would have to replicate or renegotiate all of these services. It would have to design border checks, a national police force, a defense infrastructure, diplomacy, trade treaties, and citizenship systems. Its location in the Indo-Pacific region does give it a strategic value, but it would face a lot of pressure to choose alliances, maintain Commonwealth membership, align with Australia still, or pivot towards Indonesia, Singapore, China, or even the US. Australian regional influence would become much smaller, not just because they would lose half of their coast, but also because West Australia makes up nearly 40% of their exports and about half of their resource wealth. In conclusion, Western Australia's size, resources, economy, identity, and geography make it a serious candidate for being its own country. Historically, it nearly achieved this in 1933 and has flirted with it ever since. Today, economic dominance and regional pride keep Waxit alive in public consciousness. More likely, they use this secessionary rhetoric to negotiate fairer fiscal treatment, infrastructure investment, and decision-making within the Federation. What do you think? Should it be independent? Let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you to my patrons for their direct support, and I will see you next time for more general knowledge.